It was past midnight when Anna arrived in the village of Vadu, a place hidden among forested hills. The darkness was thick, like a heavy fog that seemed to swallow every trace of light. The unkempt dirt road, riddled with potholes, led her to the house she had inherited from an aunt she knew almost nothing about. It was said that no one had lived there for over 40 years. The village of Vadu had once been a thriving community, with well-kept homes and orchards stretching to the edge of the forest. It was known for its crystal-clear spring, which locals believed had healing powers. The villagers lived simple lives, relying on farming and animal husbandry, but they maintained a deep connection to traditions and superstitions. Over 40 years ago, something changed. A series of mysterious disappearances began to haunt the village. It all started with a 9-year-old girl who vanished in the forest on an autumn night and was never found again. Soon after, other villagers began to disappear without a trace. A shepherd tending his flock, a woman fetching water from the spring, a young man who left for the market and never returned. The authorities found no clues, and fear crept into the hearts of the people. The elders whispered about a shadow that crept from the forest as night fell. Some believed the village had been cursed after a stranger was driven away and left to die at the forest's edge decades before. Others claimed the forest concealed something older and darker, something that was never meant to be disturbed. In the end, families began to leave, fearing they would be the next victims. Homes were abandoned, gardens overgrown, and the church, once the heart of the village, was locked after the priest vanished without a trace on a rainy night. Only a few elderly residents remained, too stubborn or too poor to leave. When the last of them died, Vadu was left to time and shadows. It is said that sometimes footsteps can be heard along the dusty road at night, though no one should be there, and a faint lantern light, as if someone were searching for something long lost, occasionally flickers between the trees at the forest's edge. But Anna didn't know any of this. She had spent most of her life abroad with her family. The excitement of returning to Romanian soil and the idea of owning a small countryside house made her rush back as soon as she received news of the inheritance left by her aunt. She didn't care about the village's history or its remoteness, only the fact that she finally had a place to escape the gray concrete where she spent most of her days. She was happy to have a place that promised the peace she so desperately needed. Yet, as she passed the first row of abandoned houses, a heavy feeling crept into her stomach. It wasn't just quiet. It was a complete absence of sound. No crickets, no rustling leaves in the breeze. Before stepping out of the car, she glanced toward the house. A crumbling structure with a sagging roof, as if the weight of time had bent it down. In the moonlight, she could just make out a rotting wooden sign where a single word remained barely visible: "Stay." The door opened surprisingly easily. The air inside was cold and smelled of mold mixed with something harder to define, a metallic, rusty scent of age. The wooden floor groaned under her footsteps, the sound echoing through the empty house. In the hallway, an old pendulum clock lay still at 3:15. No other piece of furniture seemed to have been touched for decades. She climbed the dusty staircase, each step releasing a dull creak like a muffled whisper. At the top, only one bedroom door stood slightly ajar. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, and in the middle of the room stood an old bed with a black blanket bunched up strangely, as if someone had left in a hurry. On the nightstand, a nearly burned-out candle had left behind a reddish wax stain, like dried blood. Thick, yellowed curtains hung over the windows, trembling slightly with each draft that slipped through the cracked frame. In the corner, a massive dark wooden wardrobe loomed ominously. One door hung slightly open, revealing a dusty old dress hanging like a shadow. On the floor beside the bed lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. The yellowed pages were filled with hurried, cramped handwriting, and on the final page, someone had scrawled in large, heavy letters, "Do not open the attic door." The ceiling was stained with large patches of dampness, forming irregular shapes that spread like looming shadows. Above the bed hung a dusty painting of a pale woman with hollow, expressionless eyes. The frame was cracked, as if someone had tried to tear the picture away, but abandoned the effort halfway through. Anna stepped closer to the nightstand and noticed faint fingerprints beneath the thick layer of dust, like someone had touched it recently. Next to the burned-out candle lay a small silver locket left behind. When she picked it up, a cold shiver ran through her palm. The locket opened with a faint click, revealing an old black-and-white photograph of a young girl with long hair tied into 2 braids. On the back of the photograph, a few words were scrawled, "Don't forget me." A sudden creak echoed from the ceiling above, slow and deliberate, like footsteps moving cautiously right above her head. Her heart clenched painfully, thudding wildly in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt heavy, as if fear had nailed her feet to the floor. Her breath grew shallow, each inhale harder to take. The air felt thicker, heavier, like an invisible weight pressing against her chest. A chill crept up her spine, making her shiver uncontrollably. And then, with chilling certainty, the thought struck her. She was not alone. She climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, each step dragging her deeper into the suffocating darkness. At the top, the air was thick and cold, almost tangible. In one corner, a dusty chest with a rusted lock lay abandoned. With effort, she pried it open and found a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and brittle with age. On the first page, trembling handwriting read, "Don't let me out." As she flipped through the pages, an unnatural coldness wrapped around her. The journal told the story of a girl named Maria who had vanished 40 years ago. It was said that her own father had locked her away, believing she was possessed. The final entry, scrawled in frantic, jagged letters, sent ice through her veins. "It finds me. It always finds me." The final pages of the journal were filled with raw desperation. Maria wrote that she hadn't slept for days because every night she felt someone sitting at the edge of her bed. In one corner of a page, a faint, nearly illegible warning was scratched in haste. "If you're reading this, don't open the wardrobe." She had begun to believe what her father had drilled into her, that some dark force controlled her, whispering commands she couldn't resist. In time, Maria became convinced she was cursed, and if she ceased to exist, the torment would finally end for her and her parents. A chill crawled over Anna's skin. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, erratic and heavy. She wanted to close the journal, but a faint rustling sound made her freeze. She was no longer alone in the attic. From the shadows, something was watching her. She stood paralyzed, feeling trapped. Another sound, closer now, like a nail dragging across wood, made her hold her breath. Her gaze darted to the darkest corner of the attic. There, the figure of a thin girl with tangled hair and hollow eyes stood, staring unblinking. The dress Anna had found in the wardrobe was on her. She wanted to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. The figure began to move toward her, silent steps, yet the air grew colder with every inch she advanced. Anna tried to reach the attic stairs, but something unseen tugged at her ankles. Maria didn't want her to leave. In a panic, Anna flung the journal to the floor. A violent bang shook the attic, and somewhere below, a window shattered. She managed to escape, tears streaming down her face as she bolted down the stairs. But when she reached the door, it was locked with a bolt she hadn't seen before. In the dusty mirror on the wall, a pale face with hollow eyes stared back at her. Behind her, the wardrobe door now stood wide open. When Anna finally broke the door open and fled outside, the oppressive silence had lifted. But on the back seat of her car, the journal lay open. On the last page, a new sentence had appeared. "You left the door open.